The morning sky over New York changed in a matter of seconds. Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his coffee on the observation deck of the UES Liberty when the first shadow fell across the city. He looked up and nearly dropped his mug. A ship, the size of Manhattan, hung in the air above them, its dark metal hull blocking out the sun. "All stations report," Jake called into his comm device as he ran toward the bridge. Similar reports came flooding in from around the world. London, Tokyo, Moscow, Sydney. Every major city now had one of these massive vessels hovering overhead, like a storm cloud that would never pass. The ship was unlike anything humans had ever built. It was smooth and curved, with no visible engines or weapons ports. Strange blue lights pulsed along its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The metal appeared to shift and flow like liquid, though it held its shape perfectly. Jake had been in space for 15 years and had never seen technology like this. On the bridge, his crew worked frantically at their stations. The communications officer, a young woman named Betty Clark, turned to him with wide eyes. "Captain, we're getting a signal. It's broadcasting on every frequency at once in perfect English." "Put it through," Jake ordered, settling into his command chair. The main screen flickered to life, showing a creature that made his blood run cold. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms and skin that looked like polished stone. Its head was elongated, with eyes that glowed the same blue as the lights on its ship. When it spoke, its voice was calm and measured, as if it were reading a grocery list instead of addressing an entire planet. "People of Earth, I am High Commander Zexathara of the Hegemony Coalition. We have come to your world not as conquerors, but as liberators. For too long, your species has suffered under the burden of primitive governance and endless conflict. Your wars, your hatred, your destruction of your own planet. These things end today." Jake felt his jaw clench. The alien continued speaking as if humanity were children who needed to be told what was best for them. "We represent 12 advanced civilizations that have lived in peace for over 10,000 of your years. We have watched your species with growing concern as you spread violence wherever you go. Your expansion into space threatens the stability our alliance has worked so hard to build. This cannot continue." Dr. Lisa Hayes, Earth's top expert on space biology, was watching from the science station. She had studied every form of life humans had encountered in their expansion across the solar system. But this creature was beyond anything in her experience. Its movements were too smooth, too calculated. Everything about it suggested a species that had never known real hardship or uncertainty. "You have 72 of your hours to surrender your weapons and submit to integration into our galactic community. We will provide you with clean technology, abundant resources, and guidance toward a more civilized existence. Your wars will end. Your suffering will cease. You will know peace under our protection." The transmission cut to show images of other worlds under hegemony control. Beautiful cities with spires that reached the clouds. Gardens that stretched for miles without a single weed. People of various alien species living in perfect harmony, their faces blank and content. "If you choose to resist," Zexathara continued, "you will only bring suffering upon yourselves. We have the power to reduce your cities to ash or to preserve them unchanged. The choice is yours, but it must be made quickly. We are patient, but we will not wait forever." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Jake looked around at his crew, seeing his own thoughts reflected in their faces. These aliens spoke of peace and civilization, but their ultimatum felt like anything but peaceful. Admiral Carl Stone appeared on the secondary screen, calling from Earth Defense Headquarters. His weathered face was grim but determined. "All ship? Commanders, this is a code black situation. We're calling an emergency session of the Global Defense Council in 1 hour. Until then, all vessels are to maintain defensive positions and await orders." Jake nodded and cut the transmission. He turned to his tactical officer, a steady man named Roy Baker. "What's our weapons status?" "All systems operational, Captain. But honestly, against ships that size?" Roy shook his head. "Our biggest missiles would be like throwing rocks at a mountain." Dr. Hayes looked up from her console where she had been analyzing the alien broadcast. "Captain, I've been studying their transmission patterns and biological markers. These beings evolved in a completely different environment than us. Look at Their bone structure, their muscle development. They come from a world with low gravity and abundant resources. What does that mean for us? Jake asked. It means they've never had to fight for survival the way we have. Their entire psychology is built around cooperation and abundance. They probably see our wars and conflicts as proof that we're broken, not as evidence that we know how to overcome impossible odds. Communications Officer Clark raised her hand. Captain, I'm picking up chatter from other ships. Some of the civilian stations are talking about surrender. They're scared. Jake wasn't surprised. The alien ships were massive, clearly advanced beyond human understanding, and their ultimatum left little room for hope. But something about the whole situation bothered him. If these aliens were so advanced and powerful, why give an ultimatum at all? Why not just take what they wanted? Dr. Hayes, in your opinion, what happens to species that get integrated into this hegemony? Lisa pulled up the images from the transmission on her screen. The alien cities were beautiful, but sterile. The people looked healthy but empty, like dolls arranged in a display case. I think they lose whatever made them unique in the first place. These aliens talk about ending our wars and our conflicts, but those same conflicts are what drove us to reach for the stars in the first place. Outside the observation windows, the alien ship hung motionless in the sky. Other vessels of the human fleet were taking defensive positions, their smaller ships looking like toys next to the massive alien craft. Jake knew they were outmatched, in every way that could be measured on paper. But humans had never been good at accepting defeat, especially when their freedom was at stake. Earth had seen tyrants before, beings who promised peace in exchange for submission. It never ended well. For the people who surrendered, Jake activated the ship-wide communication system. This is the captain speaking. In 72 hours, we may be at war with an enemy that outguns us, outnumbers us, and has technology we can barely understand. But we've faced impossible odds before. Our ancestors fought against empires that seemed unstoppable, and they won, not because they were stronger, but because they refused to give up their right to choose their own destiny. He paused, looking out at the alien ship that dominated the sky. These aliens think they know what's best for humanity. They're about to learn that humans don't ask permission to be free. 3 months into the war, Captain Amy Foster found herself commanding a ship that shouldn't exist. The USS Defiant had been destroyed 2 weeks earlier when a hegemony cruiser hit it with a direct strike from their main weapon. By all logic, she and her crew should have been dead. Instead, they were using the wreckage as a base of operations. The ship's hull was cracked open like an egg, its atmosphere long since vented into space, and its main power systems completely fried. But Amy had grown up on the mining stations of Ceres, where equipment failure was a daily occurrence and making do with less was a survival skill. Life support is holding in sections C through F, reported her engineer, a grizzled veteran named Pat Collins. We've got partial gravity from the rotation, and the backup fusion cell should give us another week of power if we're careful. Amy nodded, floating near what had once been her captain's chair. She was wearing a patched EVA suit that had been repaired so many times it looked like a quilt. Her crew was scattered through the destroyed ship, some in pressurized sections, others working in vacuum. They stayed in contact through a jury-rigged communication system built from salvaged parts. "What's our weapons status?" she asked. "We've got 1 functioning missile tube and about 30 mining charges we can use as improvised warheads," Pat replied. "The main guns are slag, but I rigged up a launcher system using the cargo bay doors." Through the twisted remains of her bridge windows, Amy could see the hegemony patrol ship that was hunting them. It moved in perfect search patterns, its sensors sweeping methodically through the debris field where the battle had taken place. The alien crew probably assumed all the human ships had been destroyed and were just checking for survivors to rescue. That was their mistake. Humans didn't abandon ship when their vessels were damaged. They adapted to the new conditions and kept fighting. "Signal the others," Amy ordered. "Execute Plan Lazarus." Throughout the debris field, 6 other destroyed human vessels came to life. They had all been written off as total losses by both sides, but their crews had remained hidden in the wreckage, surviving on emergency supplies and sheer stubbornness. Now they launched their improvised weapons at the unsuspecting hegemony ship. The alien vessel's shields deflected the first few missiles, but its computer systems couldn't track targets that were launching from what its sensors registered as wreckage. By the time the hegemony crew realized what was happening, mining charges were detonating against their hull and cutting through their armor. The alien ship tried to retreat, but found itself surrounded by debris that was suddenly hostile. Human crews that had been presumed dead were firing from every direction, using weapons cobbled together from spare parts and desperation. Commander Rick Davis watched the engagement from his hiding spot inside a wrecked freighter. He had been leading deep reconnaissance missions into hegemony-controlled space, and what he had learned about the aliens disturbed him more than their superior firepower. "They can't fight damaged," he reported to Admiral Stone during his next scheduled communication. "I've observed 17 alien vessels that suffered major system failures. In every case, the crew abandoned ship immediately. They don't have the concept of battlefield repairs or continuing to fight with broken equipment." This revelation was spreading through human forces like wildfire. Earth's military had always trained its people to improvise, adapt, and overcome. Every human ship carried spare parts and repair equipment because breaking down in space meant death. But the hegemony had built their technology to be so reliable that their crews had never learned to cope with failure. Dr. Kate Williams, working from a research station hidden in Saturn's rings, had been studying captured alien personnel. What she discovered was even more shocking than their technological dependence. "Their psychology is completely different from ours," she explained in her encrypted report. "When their primary systems fail, they experience something like severe anxiety disorder. They literally cannot function effectively without their technology working perfectly." The implications were staggering. Humans grew more resourceful when conditions deteriorated, but aliens became less capable. The worse things got, the greater humanity's advantage became. This understanding led to new tactics that would have been unthinkable in conventional warfare. Human forces began deliberately damaging their own ships to make them harder to detect and predict. Crews learned to operate in vacuum, in extreme cold, and with failing life support systems. What should have been defeat conditions became operational parameters. Meanwhile, civilian engineer Pete Johnson was coordinating Earth's transformation into a massive weapons factory, but he had discovered something that changed everything. Human civilian infrastructure was actually more adaptable than military equipment. "The aliens target military installations first," he explained to his team of volunteers. "But they don't understand that on Earth, the difference between civilian and military technology is mostly a matter of application." Automotive factories began producing tank armor. Chemical plants created explosive compounds. Even food processing facilities contributed by developing new types of battlefield rations that could keep soldiers fighting in conditions where normal supplies would fail. The hegemony forces found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to have unlimited industrial capacity. Every time they destroyed a human military facility, 10 civilian installations would start producing weapons to replace what was lost. It was like fighting a hydra that grew stronger every time they cut off one of its heads. Dr. Lisa Hayes aboard the Liberty made another crucial discovery while analyzing alien behavior patterns. "Captain, I think I understand why they gave us an ultimatum instead of just attacking immediately. Their entire civilization is built on consensus and gradual change. The concept of total war is foreign to them." Jake Morrison considered this as he watched reports of battles across the solar system. "So they're not just technologically unprepared for this kind of fight, they're psychologically unprepared." "Exactly. Look at their tactics. They still try to minimize casualties even when we're shooting back. They capture our damaged ships instead of destroying them. They're fighting a police action while we're fighting for survival." This fundamental difference in mindset was becoming the deciding factor in individual battles. Human forces fought like cornered animals, using every trick and dirty tactic they could think of. Alien forces fought like peacekeepers trying to restore order, constrained by rules and procedures that made no sense in a life-or-death struggle. Lieutenant Sam Carter, now commanding a small squadron of converted mining ships, had developed new tactics based on this understanding. Instead of trying to match alien firepower, His ships would deliberately take damage to get close enough to use their industrial cutting beams. We call it the kamikaze approach, he explained to new volunteers. Let them think they've crippled you, then hit them with everything you've got when they move in to capture survivors. The tactic was working. Hegemony crews, trained to show mercy to defeated enemies, kept falling for the same trick. They couldn't comprehend an enemy that would continue fighting after suffering what they considered fatal damage. Back on Earth, resistance cells were using similar tactics on a larger scale. When alien forces occupied major cities, they found themselves facing an enemy that fought from the rubble of their own homes. Humans used destroyed buildings as fortifications, turned collapsed bridges into weapon platforms, and turned every pile of debris into a potential ambush site. The aliens had expected to pacify Earth's population quickly once they demonstrated their overwhelming technological superiority. Instead, they found that destroying human infrastructure only made the humans more dangerous, not less. High Commander Zexathera was beginning to understand that his forces were fighting something beyond their experience. His tactical computers could predict the movements of any rational enemy, but humans didn't seem to follow any rational pattern. They fought harder when they were losing, took greater risks when they were outnumbered, and seemed to view impossible odds as a personal challenge rather than a reason to surrender. How do we defeat an enemy that refuses to acknowledge defeat? He asked his advisors during a strategy meeting aboard his flagship. The question hung in the air unanswered. In 10,000 years of galactic civilization, the hegemony had never encountered a species like humanity. Every other race they had integrated into their alliance had eventually seen the logic of surrender when faced with superior force. But humans seemed to operate on a completely different logic, one that said freedom was worth any price and that defeat was only final when you stopped fighting. As the war entered its 4th month, both sides were learning hard lessons about the nature of their enemy, but only one side was adapting and growing stronger from those lessons. The other was beginning to fracture under the strain of fighting an enemy they could not understand. The 72 hours passed like a countdown to the end of the world. When Earth's governments delivered their unanimous refusal to surrender, the hegemony's response was swift and precise. Blue beams lanced down from the alien ships, striking military bases and communication centers with surgical accuracy. The weapons made no sound, left no craters, and caused no fires. They simply erased whatever they touched from existence. Lieutenant Sam Carter watched from the cockpit of his mining ship, the ore hauler, as the Perth Defense Station vanished in a flash of blue light. One moment it was there, bristling with defensive weapons and radar arrays. The next moment, there was only empty ground where 2,000 people had been working. Jesus, his co-pilot muttered. Danny Walsh was a mining engineer who had volunteered when the call went out for civilian vessels to join the defense fleet. Like Sam, he had never expected to find himself in a war against aliens. Stay focused, Sam ordered, though his own hands were shaking on the controls. The ore hauler was never meant to be a warship. It was designed to extract metals from asteroids and haul them back to processing stations. But when Admiral Stone put out the emergency recruitment call, every ship that could fly had answered. The mining vessel's hull was thick enough to survive impacts from space debris traveling at thousands of miles per hour. Its cutting beam was powerful enough to slice through solid rock, and its cargo hold was now packed with improvised missiles built from mining charges and navigation systems. Incoming transmission from Fleet Command, Danny reported. All civilian vessels are to engage targets of opportunity. Avoid direct confrontation with the big ships. Sam nodded and adjusted course toward a smaller hegemony vessel that was advancing on the lunar colonies. The enemy ship was still massive compared to the ore hauler, but at least it wasn't one of the city-sized monsters hanging over Earth's major population centers. As they closed distance, Sam got his first good look at hegemony technology in action. The alien ship moved through space with impossible grace, turning and accelerating without any visible thrust. Its weapons fired in perfect patterns, each shot calculated to disable rather than destroy. Even in war, these aliens were trying to minimize casualties. That's their weakness, Sam realized aloud. What? Danny asked, checking their weapon systems. They don't want to kill us. They want to capture us intact. Look at their targeting. They're hitting power systems and engines, not crew compartments. They still think they can save us from ourselves. The alien ship noticed the approaching mining vessel and fired a warning shot that passed close enough to rattle their hull. When Sam didn't change course, it fired again, this time aiming for their engines. The blue beam struck the ore hauler's main thruster and should have disabled it completely. Instead, the ship's redundant systems kicked in, drawing power from the mining equipment. The aliens had designed their weapons to work against normal spacecraft, not industrial vessels built to operate in the harshest environments imaginable. Their beam disrupted our primary power coupling, Danny reported, but the backup mining laser is still online. Sam grinned and targeted the alien ship's smooth hull. The mining laser was designed to cut through solid asteroid rock. When it struck the enemy vessel, it burned through their outer armor like it was paper. The aliens had built their ships to withstand energy weapons and projectiles, but not the raw industrial power of human mining equipment. Atmosphere vented from the hole Sam had cut in their hull. The alien ship began to spin out of control as its perfect systems failed to compensate for the damage. Within minutes, it was drifting helplessly through space. Holy hell, we actually hurt one of them, Danny breathed. Similar scenes were playing out across the solar system as human forces adapted to the new reality of war. Dr. Linda Park, working from a research station in the asteroid belt, made the discovery that changed everything. The alien technology relied on quantum-locked systems that maintained perfect efficiency under normal conditions. But human equipment, jury-rigged and constantly breaking down, generated chaotic, electromagnetic signatures that disrupted the alien systems. It's like static interference, she explained to Admiral Stone over a heavily encrypted channel. Their computers can't process the randomness our equipment generates. They've built everything to work in perfect conditions with perfect maintenance. They don't know how to handle chaos. Engineer Tony Brooks received Dr. Park's data while working in the orbital shipyards above Mars. He immediately began retrofitting civilian vessels with the most chaotic, inefficient equipment he could find. Plasma welders designed for construction work were mounted as weapons. Navigation computers were deliberately damaged to generate more electromagnetic noise. Radio transmitters were rewired to broadcast random signals. The results were immediate and devastating to hegemony forces. Alien ships that encountered these improvised human vessels found their targeting systems scrambled and their weapons misfiring. The perfect coordination that had made the hegemony fleet so formidable began to break down as their communications network struggled to filter out the chaos generated by human technology. Captain Jake Morrison watched the battle reports from the bridge of the USS Liberty with a growing sense of hope. The aliens were still winning. Their ships were still more numerous and more powerful, but they were no longer invincible. Human forces were finding ways to hurt them, and more importantly, the aliens were starting to make mistakes. Sir, we're getting reports from the Europa mining colony, Communications Officer Betty Clark announced. 3 hegemony cruisers tried to pacify the installation. The miners used their habitat pressurization systems to create an electromagnetic pulse that disabled all 3 ships. And from the Titan refinery, added Tactical Officer Roy Baker. They're using industrial chemical processors to manufacture explosive compounds. Nothing fancy, just basic chemistry, but it's working. The pattern was repeating everywhere humans had established a presence in space. Mining colonies, research stations, industrial platforms. All of them were improvising weapons from their existing equipment. The aliens had prepared to fight a conventional military force. They had no idea how to deal with an entire civilization that was turning itself into a weapon. Dr. Hayes, monitoring alien communications from her science station, looked up with excitement. Captain, I'm intercepting hegemony fleet communications. Their commanders are requesting reinforcements and expressing confusion about human tactics. They keep referring to our chaotic battle doctrine and incomprehensible equipment modifications. Jake smiled grimly. The aliens thought chaos was a weakness. They were about to learn that for humans, chaos was just another tool. The first major victory came when Commander Rick Davis led a squadron of converted cargo haulers against a hegemony supply depot near Jupiter. The alien facility was a marvel of engineering. a perfect geometric structure that processed resources with incredible efficiency. It was also completely unprepared for an attack by ships that didn't follow any logical combat patterns. Davis's ships approached the depot, broadcasting random radio signals and venting atmosphere to create debris clouds. The depot's defensive systems couldn't get a clean targeting lock through the electromagnetic chaos. When the human ships finally attacked, they used mining charges detonated at random intervals instead of conventional missiles. The perfectly organized alien facility couldn't adapt to the random explosions that tore through its structure. Within an hour, the most advanced supply depot in the solar system was reduced to twisted wreckage. More importantly, the humans had captured intact samples of hegemony technology. Analysis of the captured equipment confirms our theories, Dr. Park reported to Fleet Command. Their technology is incredibly advanced but also incredibly specialized. It works perfectly under ideal conditions, but fails catastrophically when those conditions change. Meanwhile, on Earth, civilian engineer Pete Johnson was organizing the planet's industrial base for total war. Factories that had manufactured consumer goods were retooled to produce weapons. Food processing plants began creating explosive compounds. Even toy factories were contributing, using their precision manufacturing to build guidance systems for improvised missiles. The transformation was happening faster than anyone had thought possible. Humanity's entire civilization was adapting to warfare in ways the aliens couldn't comprehend. Every human settlement, every industrial facility, every research station was becoming part of the war effort. High Commander Zex Thara, observing the conflict from his flagship, struggled to understand what was happening. His species had fought wars before, but they were organized affairs with clear objectives and rules of engagement. What humans were doing wasn't war as the hegemony understood it. It was total chaos being wielded as a weapon. How do we fight an enemy that has no coherent strategy? He asked his tactical advisors. None of them had an answer. In their 10,000 years of galactic civilization, they had never encountered anything like humanity's approach to warfare. The aliens had come to Earth expecting to face a primitive species that would surrender when shown superior force. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that grew more dangerous as the situation became more desperate. The first crack in the Hegemony Alliance appeared exactly 8 months after the invasion began. The Vorthak Confederacy, one of the founding members of the coalition, announced they were withdrawing their forces from the Earth campaign to defend their homeworlds against what they called potential human retaliation. Admiral Helen Baker watched the intelligence reports from her command center on Luna with grim satisfaction. The aliens who had come to break humanity's spirit were breaking themselves against the rock of human determination. The Nexari Collective just recalled another battle group, reported her intelligence officer, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Torres. That leaves High Commander Zexithara with about 60% of his original fleet strength. Helen nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed the current disposition of alien forces. The massive ships that had seemed so threatening 9 months ago now looked isolated and vulnerable. Without the unified support of their alliance, they were just very large targets. "What's the status of our offensive preparations?" she asked. "Admiral Morrison reports the strike fleet is ready," Frank replied. "We've got 40 captured alien vessels operating with human crews, plus about 200 of our own ships fitted with adapted alien technology." The transformation was remarkable. In less than a year, humanity had gone from being helpless victims to having a fleet that could challenge the aliens on equal terms. But more importantly, they had proven something that the hegemony had never expected. Humans could learn and adapt faster than their enemies could respond to new situations. On the bridge of his flagship, the Cosmic Harmony, High Commander Zexithara struggled to understand how his perfect plan had gone so wrong. His species had conquered dozens of worlds without firing a shot, simply by demonstrating their superior technology and offering the benefits of membership in their advanced civilization. The psychological profile data must have been flawed, he muttered to his tactical advisor, a being from the ethereal communion known as Advisor Keth. "The data was accurate, Commander," Keth replied in its musical voice. Humans do resolve conflicts through violence more frequently than other species. They do show higher levels of aggression and competitiveness. The error was in assuming these traits would make them easier to defeat. Zexathera studied the reports from his remaining fleet commanders with growing despair. Every engagement with human forces resulted in losses that couldn't be easily replaced. Worse, the humans were capturing alien technology and adapting it in ways his engineers had never imagined possible. "How do they modify our quantum-locked systems?" he asked. "Those technologies should be impossible to alter without complete understanding of the underlying physics." "They don't understand the physics," Keth explained. "They simply experiment until they find something that works. It's crude and inefficient, but it's also unpredictable." The unpredictability was what was destroying the hegemony's carefully planned campaign. Their computers could model the behavior of any rational enemy, but humans seemed to make decisions based on factors the alien artificial intelligences couldn't process. Meanwhile, Commander Gary Phillips was leading the first human expedition to a former hegemony world, following up on intelligence that suggested several member species were considering complete withdrawal from the alliance. What he found on the Zenthari homeworld shocked him. The Zenthari had been one of the most enthusiastic supporters of the Earth campaign, contributing their advanced manufacturing capabilities to build ships and weapons for the invasion fleet. Now their cities were in chaos, their government paralyzed by debates about whether to continue supporting the war. "They're having something like a nervous breakdown as a species," Phillips reported to Admiral Baker. "The idea that they might have been wrong about humans has shattered their confidence in their own judgment." Similar scenes were playing out across former hegemony space. Species that had enjoyed 10,000 years of peace and prosperity were struggling to cope with the psychological trauma of military defeat. Their entire understanding of the universe had been built on the assumption that advanced civilizations naturally became peaceful and cooperative. Humanity's refusal to follow that pattern was causing an existential crisis that went far beyond military concerns. Dr. Julie Adams, Earth's new ambassador to the former hegemony species, arrived at the Zenthari homeworld aboard a ship that perfectly symbolized humanity's approach to the conflict. The vessel was built from captured alien technology, modified human equipment, and salvaged materials from a dozen different battles. It looked like it shouldn't be able to fly, but it was actually more capable than the pristine alien ships it had been built from. "We're not here as conquerors," Julie announced to the Zenthari Leadership Council. "We're here to help rebuild what this war has broken." The Zenthari leaders looked at her with a mixture of fear and confusion. In their experience, victorious species either imposed their will on the defeated or abandoned them entirely. The concept of helping an enemy recover was as foreign to them as their original assumption about human nature. "Why would you assist those who tried to destroy you?" asked the Zenthari Prime Minister, a being whose crystalline skin flickered with nervous energy. "Because we understand something your alliance never figured out," Julie replied. "Strength isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about learning from it and becoming better." Back in the Sol system, the final battle of the war was about to begin. High Commander Zexathera, abandoned by most of his allies and facing a human fleet that had grown stronger with every engagement, made the decision to launch one final assault on Earth itself. His remaining ships, still impressive despite their reduced numbers, moved in perfect formation toward humanity's homeworld. It was exactly the kind of organized conventional attack that the hegemony had always used to overwhelm primitive species. Admiral Helen Baker met them with a fleet that embodied everything humans had learned about warfare during the long months of conflict. Her ships moved in seemingly chaotic patterns that confused alien targeting systems. They used captured alien weapons alongside improvised human technology. They fought damaged, venting atmosphere and trailing debris, but never stopped fighting. The battle lasted 18 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the remaining hegemony fleet. Zexathera's flagship, the Cosmic Harmony, was captured intact after a boarding action led by Major Steve Collins and his team of former miners turned elite soldiers. When the fighting finally ended, Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the Liberty and looked out at the wreckage floating in Earth's orbital space. Mixed in with the debris of alien ships were the remains of human vessels that had given everything in defense of their homeworld. Was it worth it? Asked Dr. Hayes, joining him at the window. Jake considered the question carefully. Earth had survived, but the cost had been enormous. Millions of people had died, entire cities had been destroyed, and humanity had been forever changed by the experience of total war. Ask me in 100 years, he finally replied, when we see what kind of species we become as a result of all this. The answer came sooner than anyone expected. Within 5 years of the war's end, human exploration fleets were spread across the galaxy, not as conquerors but as mediators. The species that had been too warlike for the peaceful hegemony became the ones who helped other civilizations resolve conflicts without destroying themselves. The former hegemony species, broken by their failure to understand human nature, found themselves learning from the very beings they had tried to civilize. Humans taught them that strength and compassion weren't mutually exclusive, that conflict could lead to growth instead of destruction, and that sometimes the most advanced civilizations were those that had learned to overcome their own limitations. Commander Gary Phillips, now leading the first human diplomatic mission to the former hegemony capital, reflected on the strange turn of events as he prepared to address a gathering of species that had once tried to destroy his world. They came to save us from our violent nature, he would later write in his memoirs. Instead, we saved them from their peaceful one. It turned out the galaxy didn't need fewer warriors. It needed better ones. The war that was supposed to end, human aggression instead proved that aggression, tempered by wisdom and guided by principle, could be the foundation for a better kind of peace. The species that had tried to break Earth discovered that some things, when broken, become stronger in all the places they had been fractured. In the end, the hegemony's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating human military capability. It was underestimating human capacity for growth. They had assumed that a warlike species could never become truly civilized, never realizing that sometimes civilization requires the strength to fight for what matters most. The galaxy would never be the same, and perhaps for the first time in 10,000 years that was exactly what it needed. 6 months after the first alien ship appeared over Earth, Major Steve Collins was doing something that should have been impossible. He was leading a boarding party onto a hegemony battleship, using nothing but standard EVA equipment and weapons, made from mining tools. The alien vessel, the Eternal Harmony, was one of their most advanced warships. It carried enough firepower to level a city and housed a crew of 300 beings from 4 different species. By every military calculation, it was untouchable by human forces. But Steve had learned something important about hegemony psychology. During his months of fighting them, they couldn't adapt to unexpected situations. When his small force had disabled the battleship's engines using crude explosive charges, the alien crew had followed their emergency protocols exactly as written. They had sealed themselves into protected sections and waited for rescue ships to arrive. "Remember, they expect us to follow rules," Steve whispered to his team as they cut through the battleship's outer hull. "They can't comprehend an enemy that makes up new rules as the situation changes." His boarding party consisted of 12 humans, all of them veterans of the asteroid mining stations. They had learned to work in the hostile environment of space long before the war began. Now they were using those skills to fight an enemy that had never learned to cope with truly dangerous conditions. The interior of the alien ship was a marvel of engineering. The corridors were perfectly climate-controlled, the lighting was soft and even, and every surface was smooth and clean. It was designed for beings who had never known real hardship or danger. "Motion sensors ahead," reported Corporal Jenny Martinez, checking her improvised scanner. "Looks like they're sealing sections as we advance." Steve smiled grimly. The aliens were trying to contain the human boarding party by closing blast doors and cutting off access to vital ship systems. It was a logical response that would work against any rational enemy. But Steve's team wasn't following the ship's layout. They were cutting new passages through the walls themselves, using industrial plasma torches to burn through bulkheads that were never meant to be breached. The aliens had built their ship to withstand external attack, not internal demolition. Within an hour, The human boarding party had reached the ship's engineering section. The alien crew, trapped in their safe rooms, could only watch helplessly as humans systematically destroyed their perfectly organized systems and replaced them with crude but functional human equipment. "We've got control of their main power systems," reported engineer Nancy Green over the comm. "I'm rerouting everything through our portable generators. It's not pretty, but it'll work." Similar scenes were playing out across the solar system as human forces developed new tactics based on their growing understanding of alien psychology. The hegemony had built their entire military around the assumption that warfare was a organized, predictable activity, conducted by rational beings following established rules. Humans were proving that assumption wrong in the most dramatic way possible. Captain Paul Wright had just accomplished something even more audacious than Steve's boarding action. He had captured an entire alien supply convoy using nothing but a crew of former asteroid miners and ships that the aliens had already written off as destroyed. "The key is making them think they understand the situation," Paul explained to Admiral Stone during his after-action report. "They see damaged human ships and assume they're dealing with survivors trying to escape. They never expect us to use apparent weakness as a tactical advantage." Paul's ships had pretended to be fleeing refugees when they encountered the hegemony supply convoy. The alien escort ships had moved to provide assistance exactly as their protocols dictated. By the time they realized the refugees were actually a strike force, it was too late. The captured supplies were revealing crucial information about the hegemony's overall strategy. Dr. Nancy Green, analyzing the alien logistics data, made a discovery that changed everything. "They're running low on resources," she announced during the daily strategic briefing. "Not just ammunition and spare parts. They're having trouble maintaining their fleet because they never planned for an extended campaign." The implications were staggering. The hegemony had come to Earth expecting a quick victory followed by peaceful integration. Their supply chains, their maintenance schedules, even their crew rotation plans were all based on the assumption that resistance would collapse within weeks. Instead, they had been fighting for 6 months against an enemy that grew stronger with each passing day. Their perfectly efficient logistics system was breaking down under the strain of supporting a war that wasn't supposed to happen. Captain Jake Morrison, studying the intelligence reports aboard the Liberty, began to see the bigger picture. They're not just struggling tactically. Their entire alliance is under stress. Look at these communication intercepts. The intercepted alien communications told a story of growing frustration and confusion among hegemony leadership. Species that had cooperated for millennia were beginning to question the wisdom of the Earth campaign. The economic cost was mounting, and several member worlds were requesting that their fleets be withdrawn for defense of their home systems. "The Nexari Collective is already pulling back 3 of their battle groups," reported Dr. Hayes from her analysis of alien communications. "They're citing resource allocation concerns, but the real message is clear. They don't think this war can be won." This was exactly what human strategists had been hoping for. Earth's resistance wasn't just about defeating the alien invasion. It was about breaking up the coalition that made the invasion possible. Commander Gary Phillips, leading long-range reconnaissance missions deep into hegemony space, was gathering intelligence that confirmed their hopes. The aliens were having trouble maintaining unity in their alliance as the costs of the Earth campaign continued to mount. "I've observed at least 6 different species in their fleet," he reported. "And they're not cooperating as smoothly as they did at the beginning. There's obvious tension between their commanders, disagreements about tactics and strategy. The hegemony had been unified by 10,000 years of peaceful expansion and easy victories. They had never faced an enemy that could threaten their fundamental assumptions about warfare and civilization. The stress of fighting humanity was revealing cracks in their alliance that had been hidden by centuries of success. On Earth, the resistance movement was taking advantage of every piece of intelligence they gathered about alien psychology. Civilian engineer Pete Johnson had organized a campaign that was as much psychological warfare as it was industrial production. "Every time we rebuild something they destroy, we make it stronger than before," Pete explained to his network of volunteer coordinators. "Every time we adapt their technology for our own use, we send a message. We're not just surviving their attacks, we're learning from them." The message was getting through. Intercepted alien communications showed growing concern about humanity's ability to reverse engineer hegemony technology and adapt it for their own purposes. What should have been proof of human primitive status was instead becoming evidence of their dangerous potential. Dr. Kate Williams, continuing her studies of alien psychology, had identified the core problem facing the hegemony. Their entire worldview is based on the assumption that advanced civilizations naturally become peaceful and cooperative. They can't comprehend a species that becomes more dangerous as it becomes more advanced. This fundamental misunderstanding was costing the aliens dearly in every engagement. They kept expecting humans to behave like other advanced species they had encountered, to prioritize survival over victory, to seek negotiated solutions rather than total war, to surrender when faced with impossible odds. Instead, humanity was proving that advancement and aggression weren't mutually exclusive. Human forces were becoming more sophisticated tactically, while maintaining the ruthless determination that had carried their species through countless previous wars. The turning point came when Major Steve Collins, now commanding the captured battleship Eternal Harmony, led the first successful human offensive against a major hegemony stronghold. The target was a command center that coordinated alien operations throughout the outer solar system. The attack should have been impossible. The command center was protected by multiple layers of defenses and supported by a fleet of escort ships. But Steve's force included captured alien vessels operated by human crews who had learned to use hegemony technology more creatively than its original designers. "We're not trying to beat them at their own game," Steve explained to his mixed force of human ships and captured alien vessels. "We're changing the rules of the game entirely." The human attack began with conventional tactics that the aliens recognized and prepared to counter. But then Steve's force did something unprecedented. They deliberately damaged their own ships to create debris fields that interfered with alien sensors, used their own atmospheric vents to create visual screens, and coordinated their assault, using crude radio signals that the sophisticated hegemony communication systems couldn't filter or jam. The alien defenders, trained to fight organized battles against predictable enemies, found themselves facing chaos that their systems couldn't process.